Albanese is here in the UK for 3 days where he is meeting with current and former political leaders, and he'll even sit down with royalty too. Anthony Albanese was welcomed here at 10 Downing Street by the UK Prime Minister, Sir Keir Starmer. Sir Keir Starmer has formed a closer relationship with Donald Trump, and Anthony Albanese will be hoping to emulate that to keep the US on side, as well as discussing the...
When Australia's PM plays Westminster politics, the Albanese affair. Right. Before we dive into this absolute political theatre, smash that subscribe button because UK Connors is your front row seat to the machinations that really matter in British politics. And trust me, you won't want to miss what's coming next. Now then, picture this if you will. Anthony Albanese, Australia's Labour Prime Minister, jets into Britain on what's ostensibly a diplomatic mission, meets our king at the hallowed halls of Balmoral, exchanges pleasantries with Keir Starmer at number 10, and then does something rather extraordinary. He becomes the first Australian Prime Minister in history to address the UK Labour Party conference. Diplomatic courtesy or partisan meddling. That, dear viewers, is precisely the question that's got Westminster's knickers in a proper twist. Let's start with the optics, shall we? Albanese's 11-day jaunt across the US and UK reads like a progressive politician's dream itinerary. Progressive political conferences in London, cozy chats with Tony Blair, meetings with the leaders of Canada and Spain, and the pièce de résistance, a keynote address to Labour's faithful in Liverpool. For a man who's supposed to be representing Australia's national interests, he's spending an awful lot of time in distinctly red company. But here's where it gets deliciously complicated. Susan Ley, Australia's opposition leader, has come out swinging with accusations that would make even the most seasoned Westminster warrior blush. Swanning around on the taxpayer dollar, she calls it, and frankly, the woman has a point. When you're using public funds for what appears to be partisan political networking, questions must be asked. The Australian public aren't paying for their Prime Minister to play Labour Party cheerleader on foreign soil. Now, let's talk about what this really represents, because beneath the surface of diplomatic niceties lies something far more intriguing. We're witnessing the emergence of a transnational progressive alliance that operates with a kind of coordinated precision that would make any political strategist weep with envy. Think about it. Here's Albanese, fresh from meetings with Starmer, Blair, and other European centre-left leaders, addressing the Labour conference at a time when Starmer's government is still finding its feet. This isn't coincidence. It's calculated political theatre. The timing is everything. Starmer's Labour government, barely months into power, needs all the international credibility it can muster. Having a fellow Labour Prime Minister from the Commonwealth validate their approach provides exactly the kind of soft power boost that money simply cannot buy. It's political endorsement disguised as diplomatic courtesy, and it's rather brilliant in its audacity. But let's examine the constitutional implications, because this is where things get properly messy. Albanese serves as Australia's head of government, representing all Australians, not just those who voted Labour. When he stands before the UK Labour conference, speaking as Australia's Prime Minister rather than as a party politician, is blurring lines that constitutional scholars spend careers trying to define. The Westminster system depends on clear distinctions between partisan politics and state functions, yet here we have those boundaries being deliberately muddied. The irony is absolutely delicious when you consider Albanese's Republican credentials. Here's a man who spent years advocating for Australia to cut ties with the British monarchy, yet is cozying up to Balmoral, presenting King Charles with gifts and playing the diplomatic game with all the enthusiasm of a seasoned courtier. The photo he presented, showing the King's visit to Australia framed in local timber, is symbolically rich with contradiction. It's simultaneously an acknowledgement of the current constitutional arrangement and a perhaps unconscious nod to Australia's desire to frame its own narrative. The meeting at Balmoral itself deserves scrutiny. Protocol dictates that such encounters remain private, but the very fact that it occurred sends signals across the Commonwealth. Charles, as King of Australia as much as Britain, hosting Albanese at his private Scottish retreat suggests a level of intimacy that goes beyond mere constitutional duty. It's the monarchy hedging its bets, maintaining relationships with Republican-leaning leaders while they still hold the reins of power. What's particularly fascinating is how this plays into Britain's post-Brexit positioning. Starmer's government is desperately seeking to rebuild international relationships that were strained during the Conservative years. Having Commonwealth leaders publicly backing Labour's approach provides crucial validation for their progressive realism narrative. Albanese's presence at the conference isn't just diplomatic theatre. It's a strategic investment in Labour's long-term credibility. The opposition criticism from Lay reveals deeper tensions within Australia's political landscape. Her accusations of swanning around with left-wing mates tap into a broader narrative about Labour's alleged preference for international virtue signalling over domestic priorities. It's classic opposition politics, but it raises legitimate questions about the appropriate use of public resources for what appear to be partisan activities. Consider the precedent this sets. If Australian prime ministers can address UK party conferences, what's to stop British prime ministers returning the favour? We could see the emergence of a formal progressive international, where centre-left leaders actively campaign for each other across national boundaries. The implications for democratic sovereignty are profound and largely unexplored. The cost question that Lay raises isn't merely about taxpayer accountability. It's about the fundamental purpose of diplomatic missions. Traditional diplomacy focuses on bilateral relationships, trade agreements, and strategic partnerships. Albanese's itinerary suggests a different model entirely, one where ideological affinity trumps traditional state-to-state relations. It's post-national politics masquerading as diplomacy. What makes this particularly British in its implications is how it reflects our own political culture's increasing polarization. The days when diplomatic visits remained studiously non-partisan are clearly behind us. Albanese's Labour conference appearance normalizes the idea that political leaders can and should take sides in foreign political contests. It's a fundamental shift away from the traditional Westminster notion of loyal opposition and constitutional propriety. The media coverage of the visit reveals telling biases. Progressive outlets frame it as successful international engagement, while conservative voices cry foul over partisan abuse of office. The truth, as always in British politics, lies somewhere in the murkier middle ground where constitutional convention meets political expediency. Looking at the broader Commonwealth implications, Albanese's visit represents a fascinating evolution in how former colonies engage with the mother country. Rather than the traditional supplicant-patron relationship, we're seeing confident middle-power nations using Britain as a platform for their own political messaging. It's decolonization through political theatre, and it's remarkably effective. The question that haunts this entire affair is one of legitimacy. Can Albanese legitimately claim to represent all Australians while actively participating in partisan British politics? The answer depends entirely on your view of what modern diplomacy should accomplish. If it's about advancing national interests through all available channels, then his Labour conference appearance makes perfect sense. If it's about maintaining constitutional propriety and avoiding partisan entanglements, then Lay's criticisms hit their mark. What we're witnessing is nothing less than the emergence of a new model of international progressive politics, where ideological solidarity transcends national boundaries. It's sophisticated, it's coordinated, and it's fundamentally changing how democratic nations interact with each other. Whether this represents democratic evolution or democratic erosion depends entirely on your perspective. But one thing is certain, the old rules of diplomatic engagement are being rewritten before our very eyes. The Albanese affair, as we might call it, perfectly encapsulates the tensions inherent in modern democratic governance. How do we balance international engagement with domestic accountability? How do we maintain constitutional propriety while pursuing political advantage? How do we navigate the complex relationships between party politics and state functions in an increasingly connected world? These aren't merely theoretical questions. They are the practical challenges that will define democratic governance in the 21st century.